Hello and welcome to another Camera Jabber video. Today I'm delighted to be hearing from PhotoJoseph, who's going to tell us a little bit about DxO PhotoLab 4's new features. But before we get going, Joseph, perhaps you'd like to reintroduce yourself to the Camera Jabber audience.
Very happily. It was nice to see you again.
Thank you
for inviting me on. So I'm PhotoJoseph. I am a photographer, filmmaker, content creator by today's jargon. You'll find me on YouTube at PhotoJoseph and the Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else. And I am here to represent PhotoLab 4 for DxO.
Great, thank you. Now I've been playing around with PhotoLab 4 for a little while, tested it, and I've used previous versions. I have to say, I'm very impressed with the latest version. It's just, I mean, DxO PhotoLab's been good for quite some time, but now it's reaching a level of refinement, which I think is just making it easier and easier to use.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely getting easier to use. You'll see in the demo some of the new interface tweaks to help you find the tool that you're looking for is very, very welcome, especially for newer users, just because there is so much in there. It's nice to have some new organization and easier ways to find things. Lots of new refinements for just your general workflow. But then, of course, when we get into Deep Prime, it's just absolutely incredible. And for any of your viewers who haven't seen it yet, I'm prepared to have your minds blown. It's pretty awesome.
Yes, it is very good noise reduction. So perhaps you'd like to kick off by sharing your screen.
All righty. Well, let's get this thing started. So this is PhotoLab 4. I'm going to actually start with something that's not new, but just to kind of remind people of how PhotoLab works as far as finding your images. Unlike many traditional database management or database tools, you are not actually building a database in the sense that you have to import your photos. You are simply browsing your hard drive. So for example, here, I could open up any one of my RAIDs that are attached or dig into my hard drive, dig into my Dropbox folder, wherever I want, and find the pictures that I want to work with. So there's no import module in PhotoLab 4. You simply copy the files off of your memory card to wherever you'd like in the Finder. You do your organization in the Finder or in the Explorer on Windows and set your photos however you like. And then from there, you dig into them in PhotoLab. So just kind of an important point. So at this stage here, what I've done is I've created just an alias because my folder is buried deep somewhere into my hard drive, but an alias on the desktop that allows me to see everything in that folder. So just a quick little intro to how you get your images into PhotoLab. There is no import, they're just there. So with that said, let's start with the changes to the interface itself. If you've ever used PhotoLab before, then this is actually going to look a little bit simplified over on the right-hand side where we have all of our adjustment tools, because we're looking at the new default workspace that's called DxO Standard. And it is a simplified workspace that is showing you just the critical tools, the ones that every user is going to need, and essentially none of the ones that most people don't. But of course, if you're a familiar user of PhotoLab, you're going to want to get into those deeper tools right away. And so you can change the workspace over to DxO Advanced. So when you do that, it reveals all of the tools that we have in here. And this is where things can get a little bit daunting because there's so much in here. You have all these light tools and these color tools and just a ton of stuff to go through here. And it can be a little bit hard sometimes to find the tool that you're after. So there's a lot of new changes to help you find the tools that you want. The first one is this row of icons across the top here. These are essentially filters that, and by filter, I mean not a filter like an effect filter, but to filter down the adjustments that are available to show you just the adjustments that are for lighting, just the adjustments for color, just the adjustments for detail, and so on. So under the lighting one, you'll find your exposure compensation, your smart lighting, you find your curve in here. You go to the color one, you're going to find things like white balance and your saturation controls and the new HSL tool, new as of the previous version of PhotoLab. Under detail, you'll find your sharpening and denoising tools. And then there's the geometry one where you can change your cropping and also any lens correction distortion that might be applied. There's local adjustments tab and the effects tab, which is where we find the new instant watermarking, which we're going to, of course, come to later. So it's just a nice way to filter these down, but it's more than just filtering. What I like to point out is that by default, all of these adjustments are collapsed. I can go through and open any one of these. And let's just say that I open a whole bunch of these. Let's just open kind of all of those in that one category. Now this list has gotten even longer. And if I don't know where something is, let me collapse these up again. I know, for example, what a tone curve looks like. I know what a curve looks like. It's the same in every app. And I want to find curves, but I don't know what it's called here. I don't know where to look for it. And as I'm scrolling through, I'd have to open each one to find it. But when I go to the lighting adjustment or lighting filter, it shows me all of these already opened up, which it seems like it's a little thing, but it really does make a difference when you're looking for something. So if I know I want to do color work, I click on the color tab and there's all the color tools that are already open. Well, there's that HSL tool. So again, just little refinements like that make it a lot quicker and easier to find what you're looking for. Another change up here is this button up in the top right corner that shows me the active correction. So that means any correction that has already been applied to the image. Now, for those of you who aren't, who may be new to PhotoLab, one of the things that you may not realize is that when you first open an image in PhotoLab, a series of adjustments are applied automatically. This is just how PhotoLab works. It doesn't do just a raw decode. It does a raw decode and it does image correction, lens correction, and any distortion correction that might be needed. It does a base level denoising. It does a whole bunch of stuff at once. And so if you want to see what's already been applied, this is a nice way to quickly turn this on and just see exactly what has been done in here. Or if you are starting from scratch, at any point, you can just click this on to see what you've done to the image. So it's just a nice, quick, easy way to see what's been applied. The last one over here, the star, is a favorites. So this allows me to mark my favorite tools. So let me just go through a few of these. Let's say I'll go into the lighting category. And let's say that I kind of always use smart lighting. Selective toning is a big one for me, and tone curve, definitely use those. Let's go to colors. I really like this HSL tool, so I'll highlight that. I do black and white, so I'm going to turn on the toning style one. Denoising, absolutely use the denoising a bunch. It's probably the only one in there that I regularly go to. And cropping, let's add that one in there. So now I've just made a bunch of favorites. I can now at any time click on the star up here and only see my favorite adjustments. So it's one of the ways that we can build a very quick, customized view of just the adjustments that I want. But it's more than just showing your favorites. You can actually combine this search. Again, think of this as a search. It's a filter. Think of it like a search. I can combine this with these here. So if I click on this, it shows me just my favorites. If I click on this, it shows me all of my lighting adjustments. If I click on both of these, it shows me just my favorite lighting adjustments. So I might want to leave the star filter on all the time and switch through these just to get to the ones that I want quickly and not have to scroll through and look for other adjustments. So again, just another tool to help you find things more quickly. There's one more tool. You can tell the DxO really put a lot of effort in this release into making it easier to find the adjustments that you want, and that is the search. So if I go to search and I type in something like saturation, I immediately find the two adjustments that are about saturation, that have saturation controls in them. There's a color accentuation, which is a global saturation, and then there's the HSL, the hue saturation luminance adjustment that allows me to saturate or desaturate individual colors. So I find those very quickly that way. Maybe I want to search for shadow lifting. So I type in shadow, and there it is under selective tone. There's my shadow adjustment, and there's also shadow controls under the contrast setting. And I know that because it's in the micro contrast settings. Now, what's interesting is you don't see it. You don't see the word shadow here, but this is a good way to know that doing an adjustment here is actually going to affect your shadows. Kind of a nice thing to know. If you do make an adjustment, you'll see right away for familiar users that there's some little changes in here. The little button that you grab, the handle you grab is a little bit bigger. And there's also this blue bar that shows up to show you what you've changed. So it just makes it a little easier, again, to find the adjustments you've made and see what you've done to it. So again, all about making things easier to find, easier to control, easier to get to the adjustments that you want. So those are the changes that we've got over here in the interface itself. So now let's get into some of the images. A big common request is the ability to rename your files within PhotoLab itself. And so that is now here. A common use for this would be weddings. Let's say you're a wedding photographer and you're going to deliver a bunch of photos to your client and you don't want the photo names to be IMG 1234, whatever. You want to put proper names on these files. So that's what we can do. So I've got a series of wedding photos here conveniently. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, right click on this and choose rename selected images. There's a few different ways that we can go about doing this. We can add text, we can replace text, or we can do a full rename and add a counter. So let's start with adding text. I've already typed in happy couple here, so it's could be the name of the bride and groom, whatever you like. And I can choose where that goes. Does it go before the name or after the name? And whatever you choose in here, you're going to see a preview of what that change is going to look like here. So current IMG such and such, new name happy couple underscore IMG such and such. So I can rename that. If I do this, I can actually, let's go ahead and do this. I'll rename it like so. So that's on there. I can actually go in and rename again. So let's say now I want to add my own name as the photographer to the end of this. So I'll go back into rename. I can go to add text. Let's just type in, we'll do this. We'll do by PhotoJoseph. and I'll put that after the name. And now when I rename it, now I've got even longer file names that if I hover over this, it would just pop up and show me the full name in there. So that's one of the ways that we can rename. Go back into the rename selected. I could do a replace. So let's just say that I didn't want to put by PhotoJoseph. I want to replace that with just Joseph. So let's take, actually, no, let's do this. Let's change the happy couple and we'll change that to their actual names. We'll say, we'll just call them Bob and Sue for the case of the sake of the demo. Bob and Sue, there we go with an underscore. I like to keep spaces out of the names generally. So do that, hit rename, and now those are all renamed there. Finally, one more renaming style is to do a complete rename with rename and add counter. So this would be a chance to put in something like your happy couple, starting at number 1. I want to have a 2-digit counter, and I want the counter after the name. So here we go, happy couple 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And now you can see how those have been renamed. So just a lot of control over the file naming. And it's also worth pointing out that this is renaming them in the Finder. If I go to the Finder here, we'll see, there we go, there's those files, happy couple, and so on. So the files are actually getting renamed in here. Because again, we are actually manipulating the files in the Finder this way. So that's that. All right, so there's your renaming. The next thing I want to show you is the new history palette. The history palette allows me to see what has been done to the image and actually will let me see when I made that change. So let me go to this picture here. We can see that this one's black and white. It's also cropped vertically. So it's obviously different than the rest of the images in here. Let me scroll down to the history palette. I'm actually going to drag this out and make it a little bit more visible here. So that's another neat thing. You can really control your interface. You can put your palettes wherever you want. If I wanted my history palette to be over here, I could do that, or drag it out and have it floating, or I can put it back into the palette mix here. But I'll just pop this out for now. You can see a list of everything that I've done to the image. If I hold the mouse over any one of these, it pops up to show me when I did that. So just a few minutes ago, it shows me when I made that change. But that's kind of a neat thing. If you're looking at your images one day and you're going, when did I do it? Why did I make that change? When did I do that? I can go back and hover the mouse over and go, oh, all right, that was probably, okay, good. So it's kind of neat to be able to see that. But the real purpose here is to be able to step back through your image. So here I'm seeing I made 4 cropping changes. As I click on each one of these, it shows me the change that I made. It goes back in time, if you will, to that state. Here I can go all the way back to the uncropped image. So I can see I did a few cropping adjustments, played with cropping, and now I'm into the uncropped state of this. I could also go from the beginning. So let's say, how did I progress this image? Let's go to the very beginning of this. And I applied a black and white preset called black and white for him. If I open this up here, it'll actually show me everything that was applied. So that was one of the presets applied from the presets list here. If I go to the next one, it'll change again. So there I've just selected the second preset. So it looks like I applied the first one and then decided I didn't really like that. So I tried another one. And then after that, I raised the shadows, raised the highlights. And so again, we can see the complete history of what I've done in here. Now this history gives us some pretty cool control. So let's just say for the sake of the demo that I've done this black and white. I had already cropped it. And I'm looking at this going, okay, I love this image. I love the black and white on here, but I need a version of this uncropped. So what I can do is go back to the state where I want to have a version of it and then make a new version, a virtual copy, if you will. If I right click on here and I choose create virtual copy, it is going to make a duplicate of the image, but it's not an actual duplicate of the file in the Finder. That's important to know. It's not taking up any more hard drive space. It is a virtual copy. Now that that's done, the history comes with it. So I can go ahead and restore the crop to that version of it. So now I've got one that's uncropped and one that's cropped as well, and they both have that history on them. So now let's say that I want to take that black and white adjustment and apply this to the rest of the color images in here, but I don't want to apply the crop. So I can go into the cropped image and I'll choose copy correction settings. And it copies all the settings, all the corrections I've made to it to the clipboard. And then I will select the 4 color images on here, right click on that and choose paste selected corrections. I can do paste correction settings and that'll paste everything, but I can do paste selected corrections. And now this shows me what has been copied to the clipboard. So I can see I've got exposure compensation and smart lighting and tone curves and all these other things applied, including that crop. Now remember, I want to apply everything but the crop. So I'll go ahead and turn off crop, hit paste, and it pastes that black and white without the crop to the rest of the images there. So again, really giving us control over exactly what we're copying and pasting in. All right, now let's move on to another major new feature, and that's watermarking. The watermarking is called instant watermarking, and it's called this because of the way that we add the watermark. Instead of doing it in an export panel where we're looking at a little thumbnail and trying to figure out where to put our watermark, it actually shows up as an adjustment, just like any other adjustment, like your HSL tool, like your exposure controls. It's all here as an adjustment under the effects tab, again, called instant watermarking. So let's watermark this image. Now, there's a lot of different reasons you might want to watermark an image. You might be doing it for protection, you might be doing it for branding, any number of reasons. So we're going to go through a few kind of scenarios, if you will. I'm going to type in a watermark. Let's just use for the first scenario, the client maybe hasn't paid for these yet, and I want to share the images, but I want to make sure that they don't forget to pay for them before they post them online. So I'm going to put copyright PhotoJoseph in there, and it pops in here originally at the bottom. I can reposition that. Let's put that in the middle. Let's change the font. I'm going to change this to a font that I use. Let's see, a Barlow condensed. We're going to use that one in there, make it nice and bold. Let's do an extra bold on there, really nice and big and fat. We'll make that super big across the image, but we don't want it to be crazy obnoxious, so I can take the opacity down on it. I can even change the blending mode. If I go to a soft light blending mode, then that actually looks really quite nice on there. And I can make it very gentle, very subtle. It's not too distracting, but they're not going to accidentally post this on Facebook without paying for it first. So kind of nice thing you can do in there. I can actually combine these with images as well. So your watermarking can be text or picture or both. So I'm going to work towards a combination of the two. And let's call this one a branding exercise. So instead of using a watermark as a protection tool, let's use it to brand our images. So let's start by making this let's make it nice and visible. We'll make it quite a bit smaller on here. I'm going to put this in the bottom left corner. So I'll click on this little icon here, drops it into the bottom left corner there. I can add a little bit of spacing in there. Let's space that out a little bit away from the margins. Let's change the text. Instead of just calling it copyright PhotoJoseph, we'll just say something like photos by Joseph. There we go, Joseph. Do that. And let's change the font, make it something kind of pretty. So go, I think I have one called Crackle something or other. It's kind of scripty. Here we go, Coconut, that was it. We'll add that. So now I've got this kind of scripty little font down there. Maybe I don't need the soft lighting. Let's go for a normal solid white on there, but we'll pull the opacity back just a little bit. So now I've got this branding exercise. So this is just the new little brand in the corner there. Probably make it a little bit smaller, a little bit more subtle. Now let's add a picture. Remember I said we can add graphics to it as well. So I'll go to the image tab, browse for a picture, and I've got this folder for watermarks here. I have two versions of this illustration. This is kind of my own brand illustration. I've got the one that I had made for me a couple years ago, and then I had to rehire the artist to have it updated for 2020. So I've got that in there. We're going to go ahead and apply that PNG as a watermark. You see it drops it in the corner here, but just like the text, I can play with the scaling, I can play with the opacity, the margin, and so on in there. So this is, as I said, a PNG file. If I want to make my own graphic in here, it's really simple to do. It's just a PNG. So any app that you have, including free apps that you can get online or even web-based apps, you can make a PNG file. So let me just do one just to show you the kind of workflow of how we would do this. I'm going to use Affinity Photo. I'm going to create a new, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels should be plenty. Create that, and I am just going to very quickly create what is going to clearly be an absolutely brilliant logo design. You're all going to be very, very impressed. I'm going to take these two squares, do a quick little bit of, where am I? Geometry, divide, and let's get rid of that little box in there. Put these together into a group, and we're going to put a little gradient across it. I can tell you're all so impressed already with this amazing work that I'm doing. I'm going to change the color of this to a simple little red to yellow, and we're going to call this my new logo. Brilliant, isn't it? Lovely. Okay, so this is against transparency. Let me export this out. Export, here we go. As a PNG file, we'll leave it at full size. PNG, of course, has transparency, so that's the key here. And let's put that, we'll call this logo. It's going to go into my watermark images folder, save that. And now when I go in here, I can browse for new watermark. Let's grab that logo, open that up, and boom, now I've got that logo in there. And once again, of course, I can put the opacity on there, the blend modes, and so on. So very easy to create your own watermark, whether it's a watermark that has text. You can do your text in there if you wanted to in your graphics app, or you're bringing in your corporate logo, or you're making something from scratch. Super easy to do. So now that I've done this, I clearly don't want to have to redo this every time I'm making a watermark. So we can naturally save these. I'll go down here and click on Create New Preset. Let's call this, we'll call this Studio Watermark. Hit OK. And now I've got that as a preset that I can pull up. I've already got a preset made that I did earlier called FPO. So we're going to go to this one as my third example of why you might want to use a watermark. Let's say that a magazine has asked for some images that I've shot for them, but I'm not quite done with them, but they want to have them so they can play with the layout in the magazine. I want to make sure this doesn't accidentally go to press with the unfinished images. So I'm going to put a big old FPO for placement only across the photos. So I've created this preset. You saw that I pulled it up, so I created this earlier. And now I want to apply this to, let's say, all 4 of these images here of the model that I need to send to the client, send to the magazine. I don't have to go into each image and apply that watermark like you would go in and apply the curves or anything else in there. I can actually apply that watermark on export. So here's what I do. Go down to export to disk. I've got a preset here that is just JPEG, full quality JPEG, go into the desktop. I can put a suffix on that. Let's just call it for the magazine. I don't know why, but we are. And then down here, you have a watermark option where you can override with a preset. And what this means is you're overriding whatever you have already done in PhotoLab itself. So if you added a preset or didn't add, if you added a watermark or didn't add a watermark, then you can here override whatever that earlier decision was. So if I wanted to make sure I exported these without a watermark, then I could override it with no watermark. Or in this case, I want to override it with the FPO watermark to make sure that that gets applied to all of these. So I click on export. It's going to render out those 4 images. It'll take a few moments, and we're going to have all 4 of those photos on the desktop where I told them to go with that watermark already applied. So again, it makes it super quick and easy to do. So you can see here the images in PhotoLab have not been changed, but if I go down here to the Finder, we can see there's those 4 images with the watermark already applied to them. So nice and easy to do in there. So there's a few different use cases of how you might use the watermarks. All right, now we get into the really, really cool new Deep Prime. So let me give you a little bit of an understanding of what we're talking about here before we get into it. Deep Prime is the new denoising algorithm. There has been something called Prime for a very long time. Prime has been largely heralded as one of, if not the best denoising technologies out there. Prime has been fantastic. It does a really, really good job of getting rid of noise in your images. Deep Prime takes it to a whole new level. It is absolutely incredible what you can do with Deep Prime, not only for denoising high ISO images that you are working with today, but as you'll see as we go through this demo, you can pull up images that you might have shot a decade ago on a really old digital camera that are just far too noisy to use in any conventional sense, but then suddenly you're going to be able to breathe new life into old images, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things about this. I know that I have a bunch of photos from ages and ages ago that are super high ISO that just, they just weren't good enough with that super high noise on them that we can now use. So with that said, let's get into that demo. All right, I'm going to start with this picture here. There we go. So this is shot in a zoo. We've got this little kitty cat on here, and this is pretty high ISO. If I click on the compare button, it's going to show me the original, and you'll see here it's quite flat looking. So I've actually done a little bit of color work already. I added some contrast, a little saturation, but it is still a very high ISO, very noisy image. We're going to look at it at 1:1 in a moment and see just how noisy it is. But first, I want to show you the metadata. So this was shot at 25,000 ISO, which is high, maybe not insanely high, but that's pretty high. However, it was shot on a GF8, which is a micro four thirds sensor. So small sensor plus high ISO is not generally a great combination. And if we zoom in 1:1, and I do another little compare, and we look at the original, here we can see just how noisy this image is. Now, I want to be completely transparent and totally fair here. What you're looking at right now is not the way that you would see the noise in any raw decoder. All raw decoders apply some level of denoising to them. It's just part of the raw process. This has all denoising turned off, which you would never really start with, but that is the file that came out of the camera. That is what you actually got. With the default denoising in PhotoLab, this is what we get. This is our result. And if we look at the noise settings, you'll see that we're set to HQ. That's high quality, which is also the fast denoiser. This is the real-time denoising. And it looks, it looks pretty good, right? If you compare it to the original, it looks fantastic, but we can do so much better than this. So again, this is the default denoise. I'm going to activate the normal prime, the original prime first, and we're going to preview over the cat's eye here. If you've never used prime before, one of the important things to understand is that it is so processor intensive that the denoising is not applied to the whole image in the preview window. It is only applied to this little preview window here. So you're not going to see it on the big window. You're only going to see it in the little window. It only gets applied to the whole image on export because it is so processor intensive. So with that in mind, when I click on the prime button here, it will do the prime denoising. You see it takes a moment, and now we see the prime results on here. And if you go back and forth between the HQ and the prime, it looks amazingly better. There's so much less noise in here, but this is prime, not deep prime. When we go to deep prime, it's going to get even better. I want to point out one very particular part of this before I click that button. Look at the edge of the cat's eye. See how it's kind of rough, kind of textured? If we go back to the standard version, you can see that there is quite a bit of texture in there. And if I click and hold on this, and this is a Mac only feature, I've recently learned that this doesn't work on Windows, but if you are on the Mac and you click and hold on this preview window, it will show you the original. And you can see all this noise that's everywhere, but there's so much noise on this that it's kind of creating this bumpy texture around the eye. Whether you're in HQ or in prime, you see that. But watch what happens when I go to deep prime. As you go to deep prime, it extracts so much detail that it has smoothed out the edge of the eye in there. So now it looks much more natural. Look at the fur on his nose. As I toggle back and forth between the original prime and then deep prime, as I go to deep prime, look at how much more detail is showing up in the fur in here. It's really quite impressive. Now I'm going to export this image so that we can see what the whole photo looks like. And then you're really going to see what this can do. So let's see, I'm going to see standard output to the same folder. Where we want to go here, set this to the right place. We're going to export this out to the same folder as the raw file. No watermark. We can even do the override and say override with no watermark, no resizing on here. Click on export. It's going to render that out and drop it into the same folder. Now, I want to point something out. This is only taking a few seconds on my machine. This is a little bit unfair. I know you can't see it, but I'm actually working on a Mac Pro. This is a very, very powerful machine. That export time is not what you would expect on a mere mortal machine. You would expect export times in the 30 seconds to a minute long range normally for an image with this super high denoising, this deep prime denoising applied to it. But on this crazy machine, if you happen to have a Mac like this, then that's the performance you're going to get. So with that done, and here is the new JPEG. If I click on this and go 1-to-1, we're going to see just how amazing this is. But just even better than just looking at it, here's a neat thing I can do. I'm going to go back to that original raw. And if I click the compare button now, it shows me the original file. But instead, I'm going to go to the view menu and set reference image as that output that I just did. And now when I click compare, it shows me the comparison to the new image. And now look as I toggle this on and off at the incredible detail, not just in the nose and around the eye, but I want to bring your attention to the mane right here. Look at all the fur in here and how it just looks like a big old mush. Click on this and we see an incredible amount of detail in there. This is just phenomenal. So let me give you a couple other demos of just to kind of show how incredible this is. I'm going to go for this photo next, just to show that this is not only about applying denoising to older images. I'm going to use a very new image, a very modern camera that is shot at a very high ISO. So this was shot at 51,000 ISO on a Lumix S1. So this is a full frame, very modern sensor. Let's zoom in 1-to-1 on this and we'll go to his hand. Now this looks pretty good. I mean, for 51,000 ISO, this looks frankly really good, but we can make it even better. There is still quite a bit of visible noise, especially look at the strings around here. But most importantly, I want you to look at his hand. I'm going to go back into the denoising and bring up my preview and drop that right about there. And what I want you to look at as I go through this is two things. I want you to look at the skin coloring on his hand. See how there's a bit of yellowing in there? It's almost like he's got bad skin. There's some strange yellowing happening. It's not him. That's in the noise. It's part of the denoising that this has come up. Then look at the wrinkles or creases in his fingertips. We barely see any of those in there. So I'm going to go from HQ to prime. And when I go to prime, it gets significantly better. A lot of the yellowing is gone, and we're now seeing a bit more detail in his fingers. But now when I go to deep prime, all of that yellowing goes away, and we're seeing an incredible amount of additional texture in his fingers in here. So even for modern cameras, even for really good sensors, this can still do a tremendous amount of improvement on that really high ISO image. Now I'm going to go back to an old image just to show you something that frankly, when I found this photo, it kind of blew my mind. Actually, I'm going to save this one for last. We're going to do this one last and come back to that one. I want to do this one next. So this one, singer in a restaurant. This is also shot on a Micro Four Thirds. It's an Olympus EM5, 25,000 ISO. So again, pretty high ISO. If we look at this at 100%, we can see that her skin is getting some of that weird colorization from the noise. There's a huge amount of texture on her face. Look at the edge of her hair. It's all kind of modeled together. It just doesn't look that great. I'm just going to go straight over to Deep Prime on here. Let's bring the preview up over her eye and look at how good that looks in there. Look at how much cleaner that is. Let me export this out like we did with the last one, and let's take a look at what that looks like. Again, we'll bring up our progress bar here. You'll see just how quickly this goes. And there's the JPEG image. I'm going to load this one up, and you'll see just how remarkably clean this looks. Look at the hair in here. Let me go ahead and do the compare again. I'm going to go back to the original, set the compare to the output. And now as I click to compare, look at the hair popping out from behind her hand down here as I compare that. It's just an incredible amount of detail that's been brought back in. Look at how smooth her skin looks. The yellowing is gone. It is just an incredible, incredible change. Okay, last one. This one is truly mind-blowing. So here's another photo in a bar. I'm sensing a theme here. And if I zoom in close to this, you'll see all these labels on the bar here that are very difficult to read. There's clearly text on here, but it's pretty hard to see what a lot of this says. I'm not even going to play with the preview. I'm just going to go straight to the export, render this out, and show you a side-by-side of what we're getting out of here. So no preview, just export this guy out, give that a few seconds in here. I'm going to set the view to preview to compare to the new version. And now as I click compare, check that out. Look at how much detail has been restored. These labels that had words on them you couldn't even see before, you can now read. The texture in the wood is restored. You can see all the texture in the wood paneling where before it was just a big mush. It is just an incredible, incredible change in there. Truly, truly remarkable. So this is what that deep prime denoising can do for you. It is just phenomenal, frankly. So that is what I had to show you guys today. That's what I wanted to show you. I hope that you're super impressed with this, because I know I am. I've been using this now for a while, and every time I pull this up and look at another old image, I'm just blown away at what you can do with it. And I know for a lot of people, one of the most exciting aspects is getting to dig in some of your older photos and seeing what you can do. But even now, just knowing that you can shoot at a much higher ISO and still get phenomenal results really frees things up. As an example, let's say that you're a wedding photographer, another good example, and you're shooting in low light, maybe the dance floor or something like that. And you know, a lot of times as a photographer, if you're shooting in a really high ISO, you know you're going to have noisy photos. The immediate thought is, I'll make them black and white. I'll make them black and white, add a little noise, add a little grain to it, and voila, it's art. It's no longer a noisy image. But now you can shoot at that high ISO and know with confidence that you'll be able to deliver those color photos to your client without a huge amount of noise on them. So it's truly incredible. That's what I wanted to show you guys today. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great. Thank you. I think it's important to bear in mind that we're seeing pictures that are being squished through Zoom. So, you know, that they're not going to be looking their best, but particularly with the bottle one, like you say, you know, you can suddenly read the writing on the bottles, and the preview sort of the woman's face at the singer, which is a completely different image.
It really is. It really is. It's again, and I keep saying it, but I'm so blown away every time I open this up and look for a new image. And I've been doing a lot of demos, and I'm keep looking for new images and go through my archives and do a search and find some really high ISO image. Oh yeah, let's see what this one does. Every time, just blown away at what it's doing. Remarkable.
And one of the nice things, actually, although sometimes it's nice to have control, with some software, when you're trying to remove noise, you know, you sort of take it one way and you hide the noise, and then you try and bring back some detail and it all comes back again, and you're sort of constantly juggling. Whereas with this, it does the analysis and it's an automatic adjustment. You have got a little bit of control there, but you don't feel like you're taking away and putting it back, you know, with different controls. So
yeah, absolutely. There is a luminance slider that you can adjust, and if you crank it up all the way, you will get a overly noise reduced image that does take on that kind of plasticky look to it. So in my experience so far, just leaving it at the default has been great, but you certainly do have the control. You can get even more denoising out of it, or a little bit less if you want to, but I've found it to be totally unnecessary so far.
Yeah, it's certainly been my findings that the default settings work really well. I was trying a 10-year-old image yesterday and processing it through another software package. Even with the noise reduction at the maximum, I couldn't actually get rid of all of the noise in the background. Now, sometimes you don't want to, but it was kind of just luminance noise, so there was still a texture there. But with the default settings in Deep Prime, it took it all out and it was nice and smooth, but it was also, like we say, more detail visible. So, really good.
Yeah, the way it pulls the texture out, like we saw in the wood grain on the bar scene, where it pulls that texture that is there, it existed in real life. The sensor, the data is on the sensor, is on that file somewhere. And for this to be able to pull that out and separate the detail from the noise is remarkable. Yeah.
And one thing I just wanted to mention, because people might have sort of spotted, when you're doing the export to disk, one of the nice features is you can set up to do several different exports, can't you? So say if you wanted a high quality image to print, you want a smaller version that you're going to put, say, on your website, and then you want a smaller one still to put on Instagram, you can just zap it all out at the same time, can't you? Which is sort of
right. Yeah, you can select multiple export options at once and hit export, and they can all have destinations, custom destinations. They can all have custom naming that are applied to them. And yeah, absolutely, all at once. Just select the ones you want and go. It's really handy.
So thanks once again for joining us and explaining that. It always amazes me how much information you managed to pack into such a short space of time. And it's a really good demonstration of the new features.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Good to see you again.